Hello, everyone. Looks like I can start. And just a little announcement before my talk. Unlike modern bloggers and TikTokers, I'm going to speak for longer than 5 minutes. And I'm not going to use any special effects and videos. So all you will see during the nearest 45 minutes is my talking head speaking the Russian version of English language. So if you are still with me, I will start. Bob Dylan in Russia, or calling the topic more poetically, Bob Dylan's USSR tracks. Why did he knock the Russia's door, and where the Soviet slow train took him? On July 13th, 1985, Bob Dylan played his big hit Blowing in the Wind on the stage of JFK Stadium in Philadelphia, together with Ronnie Wood and Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones. Their performance closed the US portion of the huge Live Aid concert. The three superstar musicians were applauded by 92,000 people in the stadium, plus another 1.5 billion people across the world who watched the performance on television. All of this was natural for Bob Dylan. He was an idol to millions, an acclaimed rock and folk singer, a poet, artist, writer, and movie actor, one of the most known figures of modern culture. Concert host and famous actor Jack Nicholson introduced him as the voice of generation and one of the greatest voices of freedom, all of which was absolutely true. Videos of the Live Aid concert shows the stadium in Philadelphia erupting in excitement as the three men play acoustic guitars without any special effects at all. If the Live Aid show was somewhat ordinary for Dylan by this point, much less ordinary was his performance of the same song in a similar acoustic arrangement just 2 weeks later on much smaller stage at the Palace of Sports at Luzhniki in Moscow. The crowd that night numbered just a few thousand, most of whom were not especially interested in Dylan's performance. The occasion was the so-called Evening of International Poetry, which Dylan was attending along with 25 other poets from around the world. And the audience was on hand to see the other attendees, not the American rock icon. The event was not advertised at all. And according to one of its participants, the famous Soviet and Russian poet Andrei Voznесensky, the audience was specially selected from the active Komsomol members. Despite the enormous attention surrounding every aspect of Dylan's life, very little has been written about his trip to USSR, to Moscow and Tbilisi, the capital of the Georgian Republic. For me, this trip is full of grotesque, absurd, and mystery. In 1985, Dylan was a world-famous symbol of anti-war protest, a would-be paragon of global nonconformism. Yet the pre-perestroika Soviet Union, ruled by the Communist Party, was the ultimate conformist state. Please note that Dylan did not travel to USSR on a private trip. He was hosted by Soviet state and party organizations, took part in formal events, and was greeted by local officials in the both cities he has visited, Moscow and Tbilisi. Many things in the country were against his beliefs, but he came. Why? And beyond this big question of why he went to USSR, there are numerous others. Who invited Dylan and why? What did his Soviet host expect of him? Did he know or care about their intentions? What did he do while he was in USSR? Whom did he see? These are the questions that I'm attempting to answer. It was precisely this goal that drove me to read and translate articles from the Soviet, Russian, and US press, and to interview everyone I could who had seen or met Dylan during the Soviet tour. I was also working with archives in Moscow and St. Petersburg, piecing together unique information. Probably now it's right time to introduce myself. Since 2019, I am acting as the blogger and author, researching and writing about the history of rock and pop music mainly, but about yachts and travel as well. That's why my channels at YouTube and Yandex are called Sea Music Travel, Море, Музыка, Туризм. I am also running the Sea of Music project, which is a series of interviews with prominent yachtsmen and musicians from all over the world about the music and the sea in their lives and the influence of each other. For this project, I was interviewing such interesting people like official ABBA biographer Carl Magnus Palm, Peter Hinz, who was the head of roadie team of the legendary Queen for 12 years and personal assistant of Freddie Mercury. I met Ken Hensley of Uriah Heep. I spoke with Laura Decker, the world's most famous female sailor who made her around the globe trip in the age of 15 alone. I met Jana Stingray, sure you know her, the godmother of Russian rock, who introduced it to the world audience in the end of 80s. All of them are available at my channels. I made a nice interview with Meryl Funkhauser, the American surf rock legend. And my last interview was with another rock music icon, Suzi Quatro. But back to Dylan. Another topic of my research is the contradiction in the very idea of Bob Dylan and Russia. On the one hand, Bob Dylan is linked with Russia. After all, his ancestors lived in the Russian Empire. On the other hand, he has never been popular in Russia, neither in Soviet times nor now. He was and he is admired only by the intellectual elite of the society. However, there is a third element. His poetry and music have a profound impact on the work of leading Soviet rock musicians of the 80s. Through them, he influenced the minds of many young people at such a difficult and important time as the fall of the Soviet Union. Need to arrange my notes. Okay, yet these contradictions aren't at all inconsistent with Bob Dylan's own image. He always was and is a figure full of mystery. He created his own images, destroyed them, and created new ones. New books and articles intended to reveal the secrets surrounding the image of the great singer and his work are regularly published around the world. As I calculated at Amazon last year, there were about 10 books devoted to Bob Dylan published in the world, and I'm not counting few books which were published in Russia. I just bought the book by Mikhail Kuzyshev, which is called Punk Rock Walking the Wild Side from Bob Dylan to Captain Beefheart. It's published last year. But as a result, those books only intensify Dylan's mystique. So I would like to contribute my fair share to this process to uncover certain details of Bob Dylan's advantages in USSR and probably add new mysteries. My study has started by chance when I read a couple of articles devoted to his trip to USSR. Actually, among few of them available internet, I want to highlight two as the most informative and interesting. One was written immediately after that poetry evening in Moscow by Celestine Bolin and published the next day on July 26, 1985 in Washington Post under the name Blowing into Russia. Second one was written by the journalist Salome Asatiani and was published in 2016, and it was devoted to Bob Dylan's trip to Georgia as the part of his USSR trip. There were some names of the poetry evening participants mentioned in those articles, and I want to say that it was really hard to identify anybody who was participating in this poetry evening. The media all over the world offer just three names like Bob Dylan, Andrei Voznesensky, Evgeny Yevtushenko. That's it. And there were in total 26 poets participating. So thanks to those articles, I was able to identify few other names. And thanks to that article, I have found Zurab, who has met Dylan in Tbilisi in July 1985. In front of the hotel, talked to him for about 20 minutes and later delivered to the singer the bunch of vinyl records of Georgian folk music. Zurab was a young man at that time, great fan of Dylan and Western rock music, known in the city as the Rock Encyclopedia. I wanted immediately to find this man, and I succeeded, despite the fact that he is not a public figure and it is not presented in any social media. Zurab was a very nice man. He answered my letter, shared a lot of his memories, and told me a lot of stories. So without him, there would not be this research, at least its Georgian part. Except Zurab, there was another person who contributed a lot to my study. His name is James Reagan, and he lives far away from Zurab in California. James is the internationally recognized poet, playwright, and essayist. His 11 books of poetry were published in 15 languages. He has read for 7 heads of state, for United Nations, and for the audiences in many countries. He worked in production of Oscar winners The Godfather and The Deer Hunter. He is the subject of the Arena Films documentary Flowers and Roots. But what is more important for me, James is a great and kind person, willing to help. It was hard to find out that he was one of the 3 US poets, including Robert Bly and Bob Dylan, invited to read for the Soviet Writers' Union at the Poetry Festival in Moscow. As soon as I found that, I wrote to James, and he answered me with a very warm letter. Since then, we exchange letters regularly. After receiving such a valuable information from Zurab and James, I realized that I have no right to stop. I knew already about Bob Dylan's visit to the USSR much more than any researcher, and was already able to identify numerous mistakes in the Wikipedia article devoted to Dylan in the USSR. So I continued to work, and I was rewarded by two fines. The first one was the film. Both Zurab and James, in their memories, have mentioned the film, which was recorded by Soviet TV at that poetry evening. Zurab said that he had its copy on a videotape, which he lost. James remembered that his relatives in Slovakia saw him on stage in Moscow in some TV program broadcasted from USSR. I searched the internet and didn't find any minute of that video recording, but finally the film was found. Now I have it in my home collection. I got it from one source with a strict notice only for home use, and I am not planning to violate the rule. After all, it is my precious, as Gollum says. The poetry evening lasted for about 4 hours, but the film is just 1.5 hours long. All participants' readings have been shortened, and Dylan sings there just one song instead of 3. But still, it's a great source of the information about the event. I think it was very important to identify all the participants of the event and to describe them. Remember Live Aid? Dylan shared the stage with Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, Lionel Richie, Bruce Springsteen, Tina Turner, Kenny Rogers, Diana Ross, and others. And who were next to him at the Moscow stage? Now I know all of them, and they are described in my research. Here I need to apologize that I'm not opening all my secrets and I'm not telling you all the names here during my speech. But my goal and my strong desire is to write a book and publish this book. And actually the book is almost done in Russian language. So all I need to do is to find an international publisher, translate it to English, and publish. But it's quite a hard task. So I need to save some secrets for the book, otherwise it would never be interested for the audience. So I will continue. So after I got the film, I continued my investigation and start to answer the question, who invited Dylan to the USSR and why? According to the media, Dylan was invited by Soviet poets Evgeny Yevtushenko and Andrei Voznesensky. Now I know that it was only Yevtushenko. Many questions immediately arise regarding this matter. How did he invite Bob? Did he send an official letter or made a phone call? Or maybe they had a personal meeting somewhere. Did they know each other before that time? Both poets, Voznesensky and Yevtushenko, were extremely popular in USSR by that time and were very well known in other countries. In Soviet Union, they were reading poems at the stadiums, gathering thousands of people like popular rock stars. Yevtushenko was part of the world cultural elite, and he knew many celebrities. Just few examples of his world fame. In 1962, the American magazine Time has placed a portrait of the Soviet poet on its cover. It was the illustration for the title article of the issue called Russia, The Pursuit of Truth, about the new generation of residents of the USSR during the so-called warming time, ottepel. Another example. Next year, 1963, the American critic Robert Shelton, in his New York Times article, compared the young Bob Dylan with Yevtushenko. He wrote, perhaps an American Yevtushenko, the Russian poet. That is, not Yevtushenko like Dylan, but Dylan was American Yevtushenko. As for Andrei Voznесensky, he was a world celebrity too. In his book of memoirs on the virtual wind, he mentioned his photograph published in the Time magazine with the caption, "The greatest living poet of his country." Both Yevtushenko and Voznесensky spoke some English, so they could communicate with presidents and poets. They established friendly relations with some of them, for example, with American poet Allen Ginsberg. This suggests a conclusion. Ginsberg could easily introduce Yevtushenko to Dylan, or act as an intermediary in inviting him to USSR. But yes and no. There really was an intermediary, but a different one. It was James Reagan, who was Yevtushenko's friend by that time, and he passed the invitation to Dylan's manager. So Bob Dylan was invited, and the invitation was accepted. Why? As you know, during his life, Bob Dylan has rejected many honorable invitations. So there should be some serious reasons for him to agree to visit USSR. Well, one of them was described to me by James Reagan in one of his letters. He wrote that both Dylan and he saw the Poetry Festival invitation as an opportunity to act as goodwill ambassadors. James mentioned that it was 1985 when Mikhail Gorbachev was already beginning his policy of perestroika and glasnost. And Yevtushenko told to James that it was Gorbachev who encouraged him and the USSR Writers' Union to invite Americans to perform at this poetry festival. Definitely, struggle for peace could be one of the reasons. Another reason could be Dylan's desire to visit Odessa, the town where his ancestors were born. In 1985, Odessa was part of the USSR, located relatively close to Tbilisi, where poets were intended to come. I have also the third reason. I need to make some prehistory explanations describing it. Here I want to mention the name of the Russian writer Valery Pisygin. He is the author of the 5 volumes of essays on Anglo-American music of the 50s and 60s of the 20th century, and of another 5 volumes of The Coming of the Blues, the greatest authority of American blues and folk music history I know. Valery has met once Izzy Young, the owner of the Folklore Center in Greenwich Village, New York. If you have ever read the Bob Dylan's Chronicles, you would know what role Easy played in Bob Dylan's life. Without Easy Young, there would not be Dylan ever. So during the meeting, Easy Young told Valery that once he met Dylan in 2003 in Stockholm. Dylan was a usual superstar. Easy still ran his folklore center, which he moved to Stockholm from New York. And during the meeting, Dylan told him, "I would like to go somewhere. I am bored of being where I live. Not interesting." And Easy Young explained this phrase to Valery this way. He has a house in London where he is not interested in going. He has a house in New York and he is also bored there and wants to leave. He has a farm in Minnesota, but he is tired of it too. He is trying to get away. He has a house somewhere in California, but boredom sets in there too. So he lives in 5 different places, and everywhere there is only boredom. I think in 1985, when Dylan was already 44 years old, boredom was starting to set in. And then suddenly he got a chance to go to the Soviet Union. Isn't it interesting? After all, neither he nor James Reagan nor Robert Bly had been to the USSR before. So that could be the third reason. After my success with getting the copy of the video film, the fate smiled on me again. I found in one of the archives, I found 2 official Soviet Writers' Union documents which described the arrangement of the visit of the foreign poets to the USSR. They described the many details of this of their visit. I have all of them in my future book. I want just to explain. I just want to mention one of them. It was stated that all foreign writers, participants of the International Poetry Festival were VIP guests of the World Festival of Youth and Students, which has started the next day after the poetry evening. It was also said that the Central Committee of the USSR Komsomol is responsible for their stay in the country. Actually, I have never thought that Bob Dylan was in such a close relations with the Komsomol. As I said, thanks to that protocols and the movie, I have a very detailed description of the poetry evening. But of course, I'm not going to describe it now because it will take an hour or more. Just I will describe the Dylan's performance. Prior to Dylan's performance, the host of the evening, Evgeny Yevtushenko, has read to the audience his own translation of the Bob's world-famous masterpiece, Blown in the Wind. Yevtushenko poetry was called How Many Roads? After that, Evgeny stood up and declared, poet and the favorite singer of American youth, Bob Dylan. And here he came. He performed 3 songs. The first was Blowing in the Wind. Second was The Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall. And experts agree and disagree on the final one. The prevailing opinion is that The third song was The Times They Are Changing, but some people believe it was It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding. Whatever it was, the first ever performance of the rock music icon, singer, and poet Bob Dylan in the USSR has ended there. But of course, not his adventures. When the poetry evening was over, Andrei Voznesensky, who also participated in the event, invited Bob to his country house outside of Moscow in the poets' village of Peredelkino. This is a well-known fact. It's not what I found. It's well known. And the most Russian and international media articles described that event like this. Bob Dylan came to the USSR for International Youth Festival. His performance didn't go well. The Soviet public didn't understand or hear him. He got very upset, and Andrei Voznesensky took him to his house in Peredelkino. There the singer suffered and grieved, while the Soviet poet served him tea, in some versions brandy, and comforted him. As you can see, the evening at Voznesensky Place occupy an important place in this story. It is also important for us because if you will search the internet trying to find some pictures devoted to the Bob Dylan's visit to USSR, you will find 4 pictures. 3 of them were made in Voznesensky house. 1 was made in Tbilisi. The person who took those 3 pictures was the well-known Soviet and Russian photographer Sergei Borisov, whom I later succeeded to find and interview. To my great regret, he was the only eyewitness of the meeting in Peredelkino I was able to talk to. At the picture, you can clearly see that Andrei Voznesensky was together with his wife, Zoya Boguslavskaya, there. Zoya Boguslavskaya is 99 years old now, and I tried to get some answers about that evening from her, but unfortunately, age is age. I didn't. Okay, the next day after the Peredelkino party, the 12th World Festival of Youth and Students has started. Its events were happening everywhere. The whole city of Moscow was its venue. What happened in Moscow during the festival? Which of its events could Bob Dylan have attended? I do not have a complete answer, but have found an eyewitness who was attending one of the meetings of the Soviet youth with Dylan, and I have interviewed him. Him, I mean the witness, not Dylan. Also, I have made a list of Dylan-related places in Moscow and is ready to publish a Bob Dylan's Moscow guide. Actually, the same thing I am ready to do for the Tbilisi locations. As a result of my investigation, I am able to add yet unknown details to the only mention of Bob Dylan's visit to Russia in his memoir Chronicles. Do you remember? He speaks there about visiting the Leo Tolstoy mansion and that he rode his bicycle. Absolutely all researchers are sure that Dylan mentioned Yasnaya Polyana, the most known mansion of Tolstoy family. Uh, Recently, I got the excellent book just published in the end of the last year by the Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's called the Bob Dylan Mixing Up the Medicine, and it's the first official publication of the Bob Dylan Center. It's a great book. It's a very heavy book. I got it from my daughter as a Christmas present, and poor girl, she carried it across the borders. This 600 pages volume. One page of this 600 is devoted to the Soviet Union trip of Bob. And there are pictures there. And it is said, here is Bob Dylan visiting the Lev Tolstoy Yasnaya Polyana mansion. I can 100% tell you, it is not Yasnaya Polyana. It is completely different place. I know which one. Wait for the book. So, just a second. Also, I made another investigation based on the one photograph which is located in the James Reagan Home Archive, where which is showing the group of writers, Bob Dylan and the lady who accompanied him in one of the Moscow locations. But enough for Moscow. Let's leave it and move to Georgia, following Dylan's route in 1985. His visit to Georgia left such memories that the local press was still engaged in a furious polemic over it 20 years later. I mean, 2 interviews published in 2014. Their heroes were well-known persons, Georgian writers, politicians, and public figures. They were discussing a moment when one of them has invited Bob Dylan to the local Hinkalne cafe. And another person was, just a second, was accusing that person in distorting facts and promising to break his leg. The interview bore the threatening title, I warn you, I have not forgiven anyone, anything, and I will not forgive him either. So, and all of that was discussing what and who spent and what was doing with Bob Dylan during those days in Tbilisi. You see, you can hear that I am trying to make my story shorter because I have just few minutes left and definitely will not be able to tell you everything which I wanted to tell. So, speaking about Georgia, I want to mention the main thing, that in Georgia there were like two groups of people. There were young people and the memories of young people who could not believe in the presence of Dylan in their hometown. And they were uh, Writers' Union officials who did not understand who Bob Dylan is, and they were just working through the official program. They made speeches and raised toasts in honor of the VIP guests from Moscow and didn't care who they were. Uh, I have got a lot of young people memories, young people who were young people in '85. That nobody believed that Dylan was here. Everyone compared meeting him with meeting the alien from the unknown flying object, which has landed in the center of Tbilisi. As I said, one of the reasons of Bob Dylan's visit to the Soviet Union was his desire to see Odessa. Did he succeed or not? In his 2014 year's interview, the above mentioned public figure from Georgia, let's call him Rizzo, insisted that he has arranged such kind of trip for Dylan. He told in this interview that he flew him from Tbilisi by plane, and Dylan was so happy when he returned that he kissed Rizzo's hands on return. I'm sure it's a legend, it's a myth. But I have found at least two more legends about Bob Dylan's possible visit to the city where his ancestors Zygmunt and Anna Zimmermann were born. And those myths are really interesting. To speak in general about my research and about that possible book, it's not only a collection of facts. It's a book about a person who got into very unusual surroundings, very different country, different people, different emotions. He came from the world where he was an icon to the world where he was nobody, known only by few. He was surrounded by non-natural and mostly fake emotions. Just think about it. The participants of the poetry evening were mainly old people, highly positioned in the Soviet society. They didn't know him and did not care. As I said, the audience didn't care as well and didn't know the name of Dylan. In Georgia, the same story. And the eyewitnesses described all the time, the eyewitnesses whom I met described Dylan as the gloomy and silent. So that was his, like a normal appearance during the visit in the USSR. The only one episode when Dylan smiled was in the Tbilisi restaurant, when the local folk music group started to play. He was very impressed with them, was asking for the CD, started drinking wine, and even kissed the Georgian ground. That was sincere emotions caused by simple and natural things which he probably missed very much. Music, good wine, sincere people. I'm speaking for 47 minutes. Should I stop? Would anybody give me kind of a signal?
Hi.
Hello.
I want to just welcome everyone to this next talk in this series of discussions, panels, concerts, exploring Vysotsky and Dylan. We are so excited today to be with artist. I have Mary Lee Cordes here, exploring her work and her life and her inspiration. And it's just, Mary Lee, you have such a fascinating and rich and varied career. And it's been cool for me to get to know more about you. You just have so many amazing accolades and accomplishments that I would love to talk about. Of course, your work with the work of Dylan, and then expounding on that is what we're going to really focus on today.
I'm very flattered. Very, very flattered. Thank you.
Well, welcome, and it's exciting to be here with you. I thought we might start, if it's okay with you, just a little like a snippet of showing everybody what it is you do as a musician. Is that all right?
Twist my arm. Okay.
He visited my house, had dinner with my mom. He wrangled the boat, he took me to the prom. He taught me how to fish, he taught me how to boat. He asked me for my hand, he asked me for my vote. In my dreams, dreaming of him. In my dreams, dreaming of him. Sometimes once he was a nurse,